As we know, the UAE, since the inception, it was a slightly small country, a size of $10 billion. But the founders of the UAE were very wise in terms of the fiscal affairs. So the constitution of UAE did not allow the government to expand beyond its means, which means clearly whatever is received in terms of revenue can be spent. And the Ministry of Finance has to work with the stakeholders to prioritize. So throughout the growth of the country itself, the expansions of the size of the economy and the growth in the population has put a lot of pressure into the fiscal affair of the UAE. So the government of the UAE had to find alternates, and the wisdom of the UAE leaders that some or portion of the revenue will be spent, portion of the revenue will be saved for the future generation, which was transferred into a reserve called the Sovereign Wealth Fund for the future generation. So that wisdom has created the UAE a uniqueness in terms of openness of its economy, attractions of multinationals living in the UAE, and attracting the talents and the companies as well, whereby it had allowed the UAE to be a home for the ideas of the innovations. And the earliest PPP model that started in the UAE was back in 1999, whereby we have found the government not being able to maintain the efficiency in a power sector in particular. And the power generation and the power transmission started in Abu Dhabi in 1999 through PPP model, whereby the private sector will ensure a generation of the power at certain rate, and the government will take off the generation at certain rate. So the more efficient the private sector will become, the government will gain in terms of supporting the expansion, at the same time allowing foreign investors to be part of the economical growth. And we at the Ministry of Finance started the first PPP model with our partners, the Ministry of Health, whereby we had certain services which are the radiation services, and usually these are open during the working hours that was extended from 8 to 12 up to 3. And then these services will be shut down. So through the PPP model, the services were provided to the citizens and to the customers of the Ministry of Health, while throughout the day, this center will be operational. And the government made the first saving through that model. The equipments were fully supplied by a private sector, and the services were provided to the patients and to the nationals. Then through that model, we felt of taking the pilot itself into the next stage through appropriate discussion with the providers and to understand what sort of legislative changes that might be required. So the savings that we made from the purchase of the equipment were spent and more wisely used somewhere else. And through the discussion with the stakeholders, there was a discussion of how to expand that model. And the private sector wanted to see a law that ensures their investment is guaranteed as well. So it's a matter of ensuring the investors are guaranteeing the return on what they have invested. At the same time, the private sector, the public sector also will ensure the services that are provided is the standard. So from the public sector, you need the stakeholders, the concerned ministry, to understand the business side required. From also to protect the right of the government, you need to have appropriate contract in place. So there is a business required, legal, legislative required, and then the private sector will be willing to participate from the equity perspective, and the banking side will also support from additional loan to such a AA rated government that is putting its project on the table. So this model was expanded throughout the UAE. We have seen some other models. I know my colleague, His Excellency Engineer Sharif, will speak of. And throughout such a model, we have been expanding, and we have been looking at alternate sources of revenue to the government. So although the government, throughout its policies, throughout its fiscal affairs, we have been running into either balanced budget or surplus, and we have seen over the last 4 years the budget being closed at surpluses, but that really has allowed us to save for the future generation, spending more wisely, and ensuring that the private sector that today, as we know, the oil GDP represents 1/3. The government expenditure in terms of the GDP is slightly below 8 to 9% of the total GDP. So there is a big portion of the economy itself that is run and controlled by the private sector. So passing through the responsibility, looking at efficiency, and through that model, we have managed to be among the top 3 countries in the world to be the most efficient throughout the World Bank doing business assessment, and also through the IMD assessment as well.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, for really illuminating insight and the experience of the UAE. Better services, more efficiency, saving for future generation, and starting with a pilot project and then trying to build on the experience and expanding that. And at the end of the day, it's really win-win for all stakeholders, the government, the private sector, and those who benefit from such services. Let me now move to His Excellency Sharif Al-Ulama, and let me start by congratulating you on being on the top 3 institution in terms of reducing bureaucracy in UAE. Congratulations. And I would like to learn from you about how we can foster synergetic and mutually beneficial relationship between the public and the private sector to create a win-win situation for all stakeholders. And that from your experience in partnering with the private sector. In another way, what are the best practices you have adopted in developing partnership related to social infrastructure?
Okay. First of all, thank you, Dr. Maher, for the introduction, and really a pleasure to be over here to share a little bit of what we have been doing in the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure. Maybe I can start off by explaining the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure is a huge entity. We are covering various aspects. We cover electricity, renewable energy, oil and gas, mining, transportation, housing, and infrastructure. So when the originally four entities were merged, we noticed that this has a very huge potential in terms of creating innovative and new sources of revenue. For a partnership with the private sector to be successful, it has to be built on a win-win situation. The private sector has to see a merit in terms of getting into partnership with the government, and the government also has to see a benefit from getting the private sector on board. From our perspective, we have done a number of these kind of collaborations. I will explain a few examples later on in the talk. But what we focused on in terms of what would a win-win situation mean for me as the government. First and most important, I want a partnership that allows me to meet my mandate and my national agenda. Second, I'm aspiring, and I think Bu Khalid would appreciate this, is to create new sources of revenue for the government. In the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure, we are aspiring to become financially sustainable, i.e., ideally, we would not ask Bu Khalid for any funding or budget every year. We will be increasing our revenues through partnership with the private sector to be self-sufficient. Third, and very important for us as a government, is we want to actually provide the services, the infrastructures to the public and the society and get, as you mentioned, the reasonable satisfaction and compliments from the public in easing the life for our nationals and expats. The win angle for the private sector is also multifaceted. First, they have an opportunity to partner up with the government, basically giving them an exposure to a massive scope when it comes to work. And also, the government is very strong financially backed. So this also gives some sort of confidence to the private sector. It allows the private sector to actually deploy a lot of the technologies that they have and scale up these technologies. It also gives them an opportunity to create revenue, which is, of course, a basic for them. And finally, working with the government, it gives them some sort of credibility in terms of projects that they are actually implementing that at the end of the day serves the public and serves the community. I'll give two examples over here. I remember in the year 2022, we've created what we call an EV Majlis, electric vehicle Majlis, where we had a meeting with at least, I think, 10 to 12 general managers of car manufacturers. And the Majlis basically discussed a major issue the car manufacturers have, is basically EV penetration. The number of electric vehicle sales in the country was not picking up. Through discussions with the car manufacturers, of course, we explained to them that it has to be a win-win situation, i.e. there has to be a contribution from the private sector for us to be able to manage this challenge and benefit both the car manufacturers in terms of sales and benefit our agenda. Our agenda, we do have a very clear green mobility strategy where we want to increase the penetration of EVs so as to reduce the emissions from the transportation sector. So what happened is that the car manufacturers decided to contribute both AC and DC chargers free of cost to the ministry. And I'm talking about in the range of 300 to 400 chargers. What we did is, as a ministry, we partner up with Ittihad Water and Electricity, one of our utility providers in the Northern Emirates, and we formed an SPV. This is a company that probably most of you have heard of. It's called UAEV. It's a charging point operator. And we took the responsibility because, as a ministry, we are responsible for all the federal highways, all the federal buildings. We took the responsibility of expanding the infrastructure for electric vehicle charging and also taking over the responsibility of operation and maintenance. Results? I have the statistics. In 2021, the number of EV sales in the country out of the total cars sold was 0.7%. 2022 was 3.2%. Mid-2022 was when we had the EV Majlis. 2023, 13%. 2024, 25%. So 2024, 25% of cars sold in the UAE have been EV. And this shows success in terms of how we partner up with the private sector. Another example I will give is also how we have dealt with some of the energy-saving companies. Again, what they brought to the equation is they brought their technologies that actually help us consume energy in a more efficient manner, and eventually helps us save the cost, basically your electricity and water bills. What we gave them access to is we gave them access to a lot of the government buildings that we manage. We signed an agreement with Siemens on 60 government buildings. The model that we used was exceptional. Basically, Siemens puts in all the capital to upgrade all the 60 buildings and guarantees you anywhere between 20 to 30% of saving in water and electricity consumption. They get paid through the savings that we achieve. 70% of the savings that are achieved gets paid to Siemens, 30% is kept to the government over a 10-year period where they recover their capex plus a certain margin as a profit. So the benefit to us is as a government, we were not required to allocate heavy capital for upgrading these buildings. And at the end of the day, we were also saving. Plus, you should not forget, we were meeting our national agenda in terms of reduction of emissions in buildings. So it was a win-win situation. Right now, we are tendering for around 420 buildings with a capital of around 500 million dirhams. And through discussions with Bukhalid, we are anticipating to go into the thousands of buildings through partnerships with the private sector. So these are two great examples that we have on the ground. And based on the mandate we have in the ministry, we are working on another 5 SPVs that we want to form with the private sector. So more good news to come.
Great. Thank you so much for comprehensive insight, excellent examples. And this really shows how the private sector, engaging the private sector, could really contribute to win-win situation. They are making profit, but at the same time, the government is saving resources and making saving from the saving that the technology and innovation the private sector can provide is happening. And I think even beyond that, maybe indirect benefit from that, the technology and innovation that held these big infrastructure projects could be applied in other sector with indirect benefit to the society. So you really helping developing technology and innovation. Let me now move to His Excellency Carlos Basada. And we would like to gain and learn from the Republic of Colombia experience. Maybe it's far from the region, but I'm sure they share a lot of challenges that many countries within our region they are facing. Given your background in the environmental policy, Carlos, how can public-private partnership support the development of sustainable infrastructure projects, especially in sector, like as we learned 2 days ago from your intervention related to water conservation, which is an issue that also important to many countries in the region and globally, definitely.
Yes, I think every country has different opportunities and challenges bringing public-private partnerships. And then one of the elements of that is the economic situation of the country. So we're talking about Colombia, which is a middle-income country, but only recently. I mean, 30 years ago, we were relatively less economically developed, and then the challenges were different as well. So I think in terms of the public and private partnerships, in terms of water management, water conservation, water supply, I think we can talk about like 2 or 3 stages. Like the first stage was when we needed to increase coverage of water supply efficiently, protecting and not wasting water. And then big cities have the issue more or less solved. Government had it covered. But then we had like intermediate cities, small towns. And then a new strategy was developed so that the sector could cover the supply of water without having too much subsidies from the government. There wasn't enough resources, so we needed to find a system that worked. So we put on this new regulation to invite private sector, so stable long-term regulation to allow the private sector to come in and then, in terms of concessions, run the systems of some of these intermediate towns, make the investment to improve the infrastructure and also increase coverage. And then we had this system of cross subsidies in which high-income families or users would pay more than the cost of the service, and then low-income users will pay less than the real cost of the service, so that the system will balance itself within the users without the central government having to subsidize the operation. And the private sector will come in and make the investments and run and operate the utilities. And this, of course, will have to come with a regulation, long-term commitment and stable regulation so that there was a trust from the private sector to come in. The result is that we went from like 70% of coverage of water supply up to, in the urban areas, up to more than 90 to 93% currently. Rural areas are more complicated. Small towns, the system didn't work in small towns. The system works for intermediate and big towns. And then what you had is investment in infrastructure, and of course investments in water conservation, because then the more efficient these systems are in managing and protecting the water, the more effective the system is. So I could say we went from like non-revenue water standards of like 50 and 60% of non-revenue water. Now we are on the 30s, more or less, of non-revenue water. Still a lot of ground to cover, but it was a big improvement in terms of coverage and in terms of water conservation. And then now it's a new time. Now we are in a better economic situation, but also the new technological developments out there. So what we are seeing now is the opportunity to use technology and investments from the private sector to control non-revenue water even more, to include new technology to automatize the operation of the water management and be more efficient in terms of costs. And then now what we're putting in place, it's a kind of payment for results, kind of opening for the investments in the private sector. So large utilities sometimes have a lot of everyday responsibilities in supplying water, and then thinking about controlling the non-revenue water becomes challenging. So if another private company comes, or if a private company to support the public-run utilities come and offer an investment to reduce non-revenue water, and they are paid by results. It's not paid for the investment. It's just paying for the actually non-revenue. So it's an investment that pays itself. So I am saving water. The water that I am now saving, instead of losing it, I am using that to pay for the investment. And that's something new we are experiencing now. And probably the last element I wanted to mention is also, private investments in other sectors, like housing. So we have big projects in housing for all income groups. So there is now regulation to incentivize recirculation and reuse, particularly in housing projects. So, and then the government comes and says, like, I will provide subsidies for low-income housing if the projects are actually efficient managing water. So we, in terms of housing subsidies, we moved from like being the government, the one that builds the housing, to working on subsidizing the demand. So they're the developers producing housing projects, and then we provide subsidies to the families, and the families decides which housing they want to buy. And then the subsidies are better, or they are allocated only to projects that have this kind of efficient water management in them. So, and that's also something that has worked very well. We have now projects that develop their own water supply systems, their own water treatment inside, and then it helps us all to reach social coverage of water, housing efficiency of water, but also reducing the fiscal needs of central government to address those issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency Carlos, on really very informative insight from your experience in Colombia. Again, like what we learned from different panelists, we always end up with better service, better coverage, or more people benefiting from these services, and also reducing the costs on the government, freeing resources to engage in other activities, and also the role of technology for the management of, in the case of water, for the management of water to achieve high efficiency. Let me move now to Martin from the IFC. And the IFC, as an investment arm for the World Bank Group, is highly engaged in the region. You cover the Middle East and Central Asia, but also you have engagement with some countries in the GCC. Could you share with us first the type of activities or engagement you have within the region, and also what are the success factors based on your engagement with different countries that enable some countries to move fast in implementing PPP in a very efficient way with focus on social infrastructure? Martin.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. So IFC, or the International Finance Corporation, is the private sector arm of the World Bank. Our main activities can be essentially divided into two pillars. One is investment, the other one is advisory. So on the investment side, we provide a whole range of investment products, from senior loan to pure equity and pretty much everything in between, right? On the advisory side, we advise governments, public institutions, public sector clients on structuring and implementation of any type of projects, whether it's PPPs or pure privatizations or just O&M contracts, that at the end of the day attract private sector participation. We also provide this kind of advice to private sector clients, but primarily, I would say over 90% of our advisory work is advising governments on structuring and implementation of PPPs and other projects that involve private sector investment or private sector participation, if you will. Now, when it comes to this region is very diverse, right? So if we look at the region, the needs and the geopolitical context in the Levant sub-region is completely different from, for example, what we have here in GCC. And also our approach, our strategy, what we are doing or offering in those countries is different, right? Because for us, internally, what matters a lot is if a country is a middle or low income, or if we're talking about a high income country, right? So when we talk about the Levant region, where the countries are with middle income or low income, we provide the full scope of our services, right? Whether it's on the advisory or on the investment side, and pretty much in every sector where there's a need, where there's interest, and where there's a bankable project to be structured and offered to the market. In GCC, until very recently, our involvement was rather limited because of the fact that GCC countries are considered to be high-income countries. So in the past, we were involved on an extremely selective basis in areas that were either first of a kind, pioneering, pathfinding projects, market openers, if you will. So just to name a couple of examples, we did the first real PPP project in Saudi Arabia, which was, the first two real PPP projects, for sure, both in the airport sector. So we did the Hajj terminal, and then the Medina airport, which is considered to be one of the most successful projects, one of the most successful PPP projects in the aviation sector worldwide. We helped the government, the Ministry of Health of Saudi Arabia, structure and implement the first PPP project in the healthcare sector. It was a network of radiology clinics in Saudi Arabia. In Oman, we helped prepare the first PPP project in the waste management sector. It was an industrial and hazardous waste treatment plant in Sohar. And yes, so that was in the past. Now, about a year and a half ago, there was a change of strategy at our corporate level. So we have more authorizing environment to do things in the GCC countries, right? So we can do more in Saudi Arabia. We can do more in the UAE, Bahrain, Oman. Obviously, priority for us are projects that have a climate component, right? That have a gender component, that are first of a kind, market opening, pathfinding projects, right? So very simply, we wouldn't get involved in a power project in Saudi Arabia or in the UAE because this is a well-established model. I mean, within our institution, we even call it the Abu Dhabi model, right? They know how to do it. They are probably the best in the world. So there's very little that we can add in terms of structuring, in terms of input. I mean, it's the opposite, right? What we're trying to do is to replicate that model in other countries, adjust the model to fit the local, environments. So we'll be looking at social infrastructure. We'll be looking increasingly at anything that has a climate component. So whether it's water, whether waste management, and anything of that nature. We also have a mandate to very, very selectively look at investing in some of those projects, right? So we'll be doing that. Obviously, not in the same scope as in other countries, but very selectively we can get engaged. To go back to your second question, what is it that is important to open up a market? What makes a real difference? So I would say number one, it's political commitment. Number two, it's again political commitment. Number three, again, political commitment, right? And then as you move further down the line, what you need to have are properly structured projects, right? Because, if you're a government and you go on the market, you want to have something that gives you credibility and attracts the right kind of investors, right? You shouldn't go to the market with a broad idea and then hope that, look, you will get a good deal out of it, right? Mm-hmm. You need to prepare the project, especially if it's a pilot project, not only like a pilot project within the PPP area in the country, but even if it's the first pilot project within a specific subsector, like, for example, healthcare, right? So hire the right type of advisors, prepare a very good project, and then go to the market. Because what sometimes governments, definitely not in the GCC sub-region, but in some other regions, what governments sometimes don't realize is that, they're also competing for the attention of leading investors in the world, right? So if I am the Masdar of this world, or if I am the Électricité de France of this world, I have limited resources, I have limited manpower, and there's hundreds of projects out there, right? So I want to make sure that I put my resources in a project where, I get the most bang for the buck, right? So if I see that, okay, there's a country A where I see that, look, they have a good advisor, doesn't have to be IFC, can be anybody else, but I see that, look, they're properly advised, the project has been professionally prepared, the project is going to be tendered transparently, then I see that, look, my likelihood of succeeding in that project, making a return and not spending too much time and money with a very uncertain outcome is much higher. So I'll probably stop here in the interest of time.
Thank you so much, Martin, for sharing with us your activities within the region, the type of engagement with different countries, and also the success factors for implementing PPP in a successful way in countries. And I think number 1, 2, 3 is the political commitment, which I think makes sense, which will like drive the other component for the success in terms of implementing PPPs. And I think also the example of UAE showed that, like the political commitment and adopting this as a model has proved to be very successful. Let me now go back to His Excellency Yunus Al-Khouri and try to think about the future. What sector, in your views, Your Excellency, are the most promising in terms of social infrastructure PB going forward?
Indeed, again, going back to the PPP model and linking that to the environment and looking at few of the PPP model that did not succeed. So it's quite important to learn why they did not succeed, and most likely within the GCC because of the financial buffer. If the project does not succeed, you easily can take over and repay where the success was not there, I think the key issue was in the process itself. So preparing the project, ensuring the market is well aware that you are coming with such a project in time, the private sector being prepared to bid in the right time, and involving the right partner who will help you in the assessment and into the evaluation, and setting up the criteria of the selection. So you are not supporting the private sector for sake of passing through the responsibility. And within the UAE, again, the social services are quite crucial to our leaders. So the UAE is one of the highest who spends on the education in terms both per capita and per the student's cost. And our leader, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed, the President of the UAE, and his Vice President are very keen to see the outcome of the education. And the education itself as a sector, you didn't see the outcome except after a while, which is a minimum of 10 years plus or minus. Then the second important service sector is healthcare. So for us to touch base on this sector is quite critical, and to ensure appropriate assessment, appropriate evaluation is taking place. The other sectors, as my colleague, His Excellency the Engineer Sharif just mentioned, is quite easier. It's quite, the private sector is more fit to take over that responsibility. But while in the UAE, where we have today in excess of 80 universities, the majority of them are the private sector universities. The public sector is still in the range of 12-13% of operating the higher education. And even the public education, we have seen the expansion of the private sector. So the parents are allowed to select between the private and the public, whereby we have created an environment of a competition that the private sector and the public sector schools are also assessed independently to look at their capacity and the capabilities of delivering a good educational system for the future generation. At the same time, we have been looking at the solutions and the providers who could operate few of our schools within the UAE itself. So we have seen a lot of schools that have been operated by the private sector, while we are still maintaining operation of the public schools in order to understand how difficult and how well we manage the future generation education.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, on shedding the light on the promising sector and also the vision of focusing on education and health for social infrastructure BBBs going forward, and also mentioning some example or success example, both in terms of education and health. Let me go back again to His Excellency Sharif Al-Ulama. And as we know, the UAE engaged in BBB project also at international level. And there is also lessons that could be learned from the partnership with the private sector at a global level, especially in the area of social infrastructure. And if you allow me, I would like to learn from the experience of the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure about the new announced pilot project about National Green Certification Program. So if you can share with us the lessons learned from a global partnership on PPP project, and also like share with us also the main element of this pilot project.
Okay, when we go to seeing what kind of global impact we can have, this is not something new related to the United Arab Emirates. Usually, as the UAE, we always are keen to share our best practices, our success stories, and benefit other governments or other entities around the world. One of the outcomes, maybe I go back to COP28, we had the UAE consensus, which focused on two major factors. One was tripling renewable energy, and the other was doubling energy efficiency improvement. What we have noticed is that on energy efficiency, there is a lot of countries, most of the 200 countries that had signed up to this are lagging. And we recognize that there is a need for a global cooperation so that we can share some of the best practices that we have with the private sector to help some of these other governments. So in COP29, we announced an idea. An idea was to form a global alliance for energy efficiency. The idea from this global alliance is to get governments, along with technology providers, along with financiers, into this alliance to help governments actually achieve what they had committed to when it comes to energy efficiency. Right now, actually today at 4 o'clock, we have the first ministerial roundtable. We already have a number of governments on board, like Egypt, Madagascar, China, US, Brazil, Singapore, and all of the EU. They are all part of this alliance. We have technology providers, the likes of Siemens, Honeywell. We have financiers like FAB have shown interest. And the idea over here is like what I had mentioned as an example. When we talk about buildings, upgrade and retrofit, this is a typical best practice that you can take to countries or governments in the global south, where you have an issue in terms of financing, where you have an issue in terms of technology availability. These best practices you can take to these governments where the private sector can engage with the government and actually elevate their energy efficiency capabilities. With regards to the National Green Certification Program, as a government entity, we are responsible for all the government buildings in the country. We noticed that this really limits the potential of this partnership with the private sector. So we wanted to start thinking outside the box, and basically we wanted to target the commercial buildings in the country. So we came up with a very novel concept. Is we had a discussion with one of our major developers in Abu Dhabi, Aldar, and we tested the water with them to see if they wanted to go into a pilot project with us. At the same time, we got First Abu Dhabi Bank on board with us to provide very attractive financing to Aldar to upgrade their facilities. We had a number of energy auditing companies working with us, so we created scope for these energy auditing companies to come up with the recommendations for Aldar in terms of improving their energy efficiency. And finally, we had a company as well working with us as part of this consortium that actually deals with carbon credits and trading carbon credits with refineries in Europe. So if you look at it as a whole, Aldar makes benefits from cheaper electricity and water bills. They also create a new source of revenue with the carbon credits that they sell. And they are also classified as a sustainable development. The bank actually gets more clients that they finance, so they get more business. The energy auditors get more business, and the carbon credit agency actually gets their commission. All parties win. We as a government, of course, we took it as an opportunity to create a new source of revenue where we will be issuing certifications, sustainability certifications, and we have 4 tiers. We start with bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. So it is a win-win-win-win situation. And we tried it out first in 10 buildings, 3 malls, 3 hotels, and 4 office buildings. The results are amazing. 6 to 7 million dirhams easily saved per year.
Great.
And now we have Aldar wanting to partner up with us, I'mar Development wanting to partner up with us, Marriott Hotels, Mercure Hotels, all are lining up. So this is something that we have come up with. We have raised a memo to the cabinet, hoping to get the endorsement of actually expanding this on a country level. So this is a real example of how the private sector can partner up with the public sector and come up with something that is beneficial to all.
Thank you. Thank you so much for outstanding example, bright ideas that can be implemented. And it shows also the commitment from the UAE government in the context of COP28, not just announcing some ideas or initiative, but moving from ideas to implementation and specific and implementation at the international level and also at local level. Let me go back again to His Excellency Carlos Posada. And you discussed with us, or you shared with us, the Colombian experience in water conservation and also in your initiative related to buildings or housing. But we would like also to go beyond Colombia to Latin America more generally. And what role do PPPs play in addressing environmental challenges while ensuring equitable access to essential services like clean water and sanitation?
Yes, of course, in Latin America, there is also a wide variety of economical and levels of development situations. So you find all kind of examples throughout. The least developed countries and the least the recently incoming middle-income countries, you have few experiences in terms of public-private partnerships. But in the middle-income countries and the more advanced countries, what you have is that strong regulation in terms of environment helps that development of new projects, either 100% private projects or mixed projects for development, have a strong impact in terms of environment and in terms of accessing to services. I'll give you an example. Again, back in Colombia, there's this large new port, which it's more than a port, it's a new port area, which is being developed. Is a port that it's over $1 million port. It's supported by the IFC, the Inter-American Development Bank, and then some banks in general. And then what it's been there happening is that, yes, the sustainability of the operation of the port itself is important and is relevant for all these agencies to support it, but it also is because of all the regulation and because of all the requests of the partners, you need to look at what is going to be the impact of this new place in the area. So protecting the water is key. Supplying services to the local communities is key, and then the access of education and all the services to this new developed area is becoming key. One second element that so regulation and the conviction of the private sector that things need to be done right is key here. Government is a partner in that project as well, of course. The second element I wanted to bring is, since I learned on Monday on the discussion of the fiscal forum, the movement towards increasing the taxation and the tax revenues for the governments. Another interesting approach is to use taxes, managed by the private companies in the private sector to address environmental, social service issues. So what I mean by that is that instead of, getting the tax from the company direct to the government, and then the government needs to invest that money in, projects, there's the opportunity for companies to invest a percentage of the tax they need to pay to the government. They invest it themselves. So in a list of projects or a list of areas that have been prioritized by the government. So these companies will be more efficient at delivering the outcome than waiting for the money to come to the government and then the government to implement it. So you have construction companies associating with industries that provide inputs for, let's say, the water sector. And they get together, a percentage of their tax goes to invest in water supply systems for remote areas. That it's very inefficient for the government to go there. But because they are already a construction company, the other company produce the pipes, the bulbs, all the infrastructure. It's very efficient for them to do that. The same with schools, the same with health centers. So that's another interesting approach. And now that you're moving into the tax, I mean, this idea of, what's in there for me as a company to pay taxes. You can also contribute with the taxes to get your social licensing if you wish to be there. And then the third element that I might talk about is local markets for local carbon markets. So some of our countries are putting carbon taxes to emissions. And then those carbon taxes, you can either see them as a financial source for the government. So I get the money from this tax. Or they can become also incentives. So they can be economic tools or instruments to incentivize the investment in the environment. So what is happening is that you could pay those taxes with bonds that come from projects that are implemented locally. So, RED projects, restoration, carbon capture projects that are locally implemented, you can use the bonds from those projects to pay your tax. And then, so again, the government is just not getting in through the loop of getting the money and then implementing it. It's just been implemented directly by the private sector after a strong signal from the government. So if we look at this as public-private partnerships in a more broader approach, I think there are many other ways in which you can motivate the private sector, and then there's a win-win situation, and then the mandate is achieved in a more efficient way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carlos, for really a good example about how this project could be implemented and the social impact that could be achieved. And like listening to the different example, I think even we could start thinking, and I don't know how the Ministry of Finance will see that giving the private sector the responsibility of collecting taxes and then maybe covering the costs associated with that. I know in some countries, like the VAT and the infrastructure required for that and monitoring the system, checking the fraudulent activities are done to some extent by the private sector. But the point is that the room is quite open and the possibility are high for gaining and achieving efficiencies and win-win situation for everybody. Now, listening to the previous discussion, that might give us the impression that we should go always with PPP. And I'm not saying no, but as His Excellency Yunus Khoury mentioned, that there are cases where there is a failure. And in some cases, there is what we call it in economics like contingent liabilities. So the project, if it succeeds, there will be no liability on the government or specific liability that is well known and defined from the beginning. But if there is a failure, then the burden on the budget could be large. And my question to Martin, from experience, from the IFC experience, what are the mitigation tools or measures or policies that could reduce such risk and have a prudent PPP type of project?
Thank you very much. So look, this obviously needs to be looked at an individual project level. Each project is different. And this starts at the project preparation phase. So before you go to the market, you need to look at the project, do the feasibility, pre-feasibility assessments, prepare your financial model, and look at what is the value for money that the project provides. If you go with a PPP structure, right? You conduct a value for money modeling exercise, and you see if the project has value for money or doesn't have value for money. What's the public sector comparator? Am I getting better value if I go with a PPP, or should I implement this project on a purely private basis, right? You conduct your financial modeling exercise, and you see, what are the risks, what is the exposure, and then at that point, that's when the risk allocation comes, right? So you try to allocate the risks to the party that is the best positioned to handle it. And then you need to translate this risk allocation into a bulletproof contract. So if you look at a typical social infrastructure project, right? Let's say, for example, a schools project. So what you normally have is the fiscal exposure that you have during the lifetime of the project, which is typically the availability payment that you pay, right? And that is something that if you have a properly conducted risk allocation and a properly structured contract, is something that you can easily budget. As a result of your tender, you get the winning bid with the best availability payment. You know what kind of indexation you need to apply to it throughout the lifetime of the concession, and you know how to budget it. Where things get tricky is if you have a termination event, right? And there are various ways how you can, again, take care of such situations. So with social infrastructure projects, what you want to have is a project that has very well-defined KPIs, key performance indicators, and very well-defined service level agreements. And you need to have a mechanism that enables monitoring of compliance with those KPIs and signaling any red flags well ahead of any real problem materializing, right? And if you're a responsible government, then you prepare contingency plans, right? What to do in case something goes wrong, right? So that you don't face a situation that, oops, something's wrong, what do I do now, right? A good government is prepared and plans accordingly. Very often what we see, and I have to admit this was also sometimes, the perception of some of my colleagues, people believe that social infrastructure is easy, right? That, look, how difficult can it be? And I have to admit, when I first worked on a social infrastructure project, it was a schools project, right? Before that, I had worked for many, many years on power projects, airport projects. So when I was told that, look, you're going to work on a couple of schools, I thought, oh, how difficult can it be? I was very, very wrong. Very wrong. It's very difficult. Even if the CapEx requirements are significantly lower, the KPIs and the structuring of the contract is very, very difficult. I can give you a concrete example. When I first saw the draft concession agreement for the network of schools that they were doing in Saudi Arabia, the contract had 50 pages, the KPIs had 250 pages, right? And you're looking at, it's very, very easy, right? When you have a power PPP, a take or pay contract, it's very simple, very straightforward. You have a meter, a kilowatt hour either comes or doesn't come. If it comes, you pay. If it doesn't come, you don't pay. Khalas, that's it, right? In a schools project or in a hospital project, you have KPIs that, look at the intensity of lighting, quality of air conditioning, temperature in the schools, reliability of Wi-Fi connection, if something goes wrong, how quickly can they react? How many events do they have per month? It's very, very complicated, right? So one thing is to define all of that and put it in the contract. And now comes the second step, which is probably even more complicated. Who's going to monitor it, right? So you want to have some mechanisms that involve self-monitoring of the end users, right? So if you have a school that's done on a PFI basis, but you have your own academic staff that provide services, you want to make sure that you get reports about any deficiencies from the end users of that service, right? And then you somehow monitor it and log it. To do that, you need to build the capacity at the respective line ministry, right? So you need to have the right type of people and the right type of capacity at, for example, the Ministry of Education that sees that, okay, this is what I need to monitor. They are performing well, they are not performing well. Then in practice, what it means is that you have the availability payment, and if they don't perform, they get penalized. Right? If they outperform, they can wipe out some of those penalties. But as the ultimate, let's say, contracting authority of the project, if your concessionaire has been doing well or has been underperforming, and you can prepare for eventual events of defaults. And then we're going back to the concept of contingent liabilities in PPPs, right? Your main contingent liability is if you terminate the contract and if you have traditional best practice termination payments structured in your concession agreements, then there is a risk that even if the concessionaire is at fault, if you terminate them, you need to pay at least their debt. Right? You need to buy them out, right? So you need to have a contingency plan in place. What am I going to do in such a situation, right? So I need to be able to quickly flip it, find another concessionaire, step in, fix the situation, and so on and so forth. Now, what do I do in terms of accounting treatment of those contingent liabilities? That is a very interesting topic that comes to us everywhere, right? I don't have a clear-cut answer, but look, there is a certain mechanism of termination payments that can be structured through put and call options in the agreement, which makes the agreement a bit more complicated. But when you have institutions such as IMF looking at your contingent liabilities stemming from such agreements with such termination payment structures, then usually the treatment of those obligations is more favorable than if you have a traditional clear-cut termination payment structure.
Thank you so much, Martin. We have just a few minutes left for this panel, so I would like to give the opportunity for the four panelists in 1 or 2 minutes to convey any feedback or key messages they would like to leave the audience with.
I think number one, for the UAE, we are gifted with a leadership that really has clearly set up its strategy, its requirements, its vision. Then we have also strong fiscal affairs and the government itself that has allowed having a surplus or running the government without a deficit. And then you have a very strong financial institutions that are well operated and supervised by a strong central bank. Then there isn't one size that fits all. So we have to think that a lot of projects will not be successful due to certain reasons. So there isn't one size that really fits. And then we have to set up the priorities. And I would agree that the services that are more crucial should be monitored more careful. UAE maybe, again, is gifted because of the recruitment process that it is, availability of the advisories that could support. And then a strong framework has to be in place whereby a selection process is very transparent, very clear, the evaluation and the procurement policies are also in place.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, Engineer Sharif.
I think my main message to the audience is we can actually deliver our own mandate by building on the capabilities of the private sector. You will see that there is a lot of commonality with what they need to achieve as well. When you look at sustainability, it is very high on the agenda of the private sector as well. So capitalizing on these kind of opportunities really is something that I encourage. The other part that I wanted to mention as well is having a robust framework and basically addressing, like Martin mentioned, the risks involved with these kind of partnerships and making sure that you are protected as a government. The Ministry of Finance has developed a comprehensive PPP manual that we follow to the letter. And that has helped us in terms of establishing these successful partnerships.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, Carlos.
Thank you. I think the message I would like to send is that one can take the safe path of, keeping everything in control of the government and then, develop and evolve at the speed that you can, or, open to the possibility that there might be many spaces in which there is a win-win situation. And that will mean achieving our targets faster, more efficiently, and less costly. And then, but the real thing, the really important thing, is that could mean achieving those targets, probably 10, 15 years earlier. And then that is a generation. So, and some things cannot wait. I mean, if you're talking about environmental issues, we cannot afford to wait. But if we are talking about education and health, the same. I mean, I think opening our minds to see that there are opportunities to work together will result in faster, more efficient, and less costly, achievement of the government mandates, and that will have an impact that you cannot recover if you take longer time to achieve it.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Martin?
I mean, based on what I've seen in the UAE in terms of how projects in social infrastructure have been done, because the focus of this session is primarily on social infrastructure. Recently, I participated in a similarly themed workshop with the Ministry of Finance, and a project that was presented there was this Emirates Health Services. This is exactly how you should be doing it, right? I can't think of a better example, to show to the audience, right? So well done. This is exactly how you should do it. My only message is don't be scared. Try to do more of it. Venture into new subsectors. There are people here, institutions here that can help you. And look, the sky is the limit, right? Try to adopt what we tried to adopt in the World Bank Group a couple of years ago. It was something called the cascade structure, right? And it meant, okay, you have a project or you have a problem. First, see if the private sector can fix it. And only if they can't, then try to get the government involved and spend public resources. So if you try to look at it that way, I think it's a win-win situation for both the public side and the private side.
Thank you so much, Martin. For me, I learned a lot from this session, and I really enjoyed the conversation with our four distinguished speakers. The insight, the experience, the lessons learned, the different project as an example of success or risk that could be faced by different institution and government if they would like to implement PPP in the social infrastructure. I think we're a great example for us to learn from. Please joining me in thanking our distinguished four panelists. Thank you so much.